So before I dive in, I will say a couple of things. The first is that while that introduction slide said I'm a longtime winter sower, I'm really only about 5 years, which is long in some contexts and short in other contexts. But I tell you that to say I wasn't even a gardener before, but during COVID, I was sad and I had lots of time on my hands and I wanted to do something positive. And I was like, native plants, there were all these online educations. I got really excited. I bought enough plants to do part of my yard, and I was like, whoa, if I really want to do this, because I was getting a little gung ho, I cannot afford to buy every plant that I put into my yard. As I ripped out all of my winter creeper and all of my barberry, and then decided I was going to also convert lawn because I like to do things like to the max if I'm going to do them. So I stumbled onto winter sowing, and again, was not even a vegetable gardener before. And it is so easy and so amazing. And so I can present this to you as a non-botanist, non-ecological landscaper, non-gardener before because it is quite that easy. I owe credit for this presentation to the Keystone Workshop team, which was led by Ray last year, is being optimized by Allison this year. And this specific presentation, Shelley Tender, who was mentioned before as one of our board members, she created as an updated version of all of that work this year. So I am very much presenting her content. And if you have tried winter sowing before, or if you have tips as I go through, feel free to pop them in the chat or be ready to maybe share them at the end. One of the beautiful things about winter sowing is that there's a couple things you have to get right, but then otherwise there's room for experimentation and sort of sharing learnings. And so I would look forward to that if you have something to share. Um, and then in terms of what to expect with this presentation, it's about 20, 25 minutes. And like I said, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time maybe for some discussion at the end if folks have questions. So with that, what the heck is winter sowing? So winter sowing is basically just a method of starting seeds outdoors in a container during winter. And what's happening is that we're taking advantage of the natural temperature changes to break the dormancy of our native seeds and allow those seeds to germinate at the right time. And we're providing them a little bit of protection because we're doing it in a container. This method was sort of popularized and optimized by a woman named Trudy Davidoff in the early 2000s. But obviously, our seeds have been being outside in winter and sprouting themselves for a long time. And so we're sort of working with that, but we're giving a little bit of protection so that we can get the very best outcome. And if you think about it, the dormancy that our seeds have is a good adaptation. If you're an aster or a goldenrod and you're releasing seeds in the fall and they hit the ground, you don't want them to germinate right away because you'd have a tiny, tiny seedling going into winter. It would have a very small root system. It would die. And so this dormancy is necessary for the seeds. It's part of their evolution. And so we're just working with that and working with temperatures to sprout those seeds in a way that's helpful to us. Some of the advantages of this method of sort of working with nature outside in containers are firstly that it helps increase our germination rate by protecting the seeds. So if you think about all of the seeds that get released in the fall, a lot of those seeds are going to be eaten by creatures. Some of them aren't going to land in a place that's good for actual germination. And so what we're doing is we're protecting them from the creatures. We're making sure they don't get washed away. And that helps us increase our germination rate. It's a super economical way to get many plants. So if you think of a $3 seed packet, buying some soil, and then maybe getting scrappy with the rest of it, you can get, I don't know, 100 plants for maybe what would cost you, 5 to 7 or more dollars per plant. And so it's a great economical way to get lots of plants. We get healthier seedlings that are stronger and more resilient. So if you've ever tried to start seeds indoors, there's a lot of fuss. They can be a bit delicate. They might get leggy if you don't have the right sun at the right light at the right time. Then you have to harden them off in order to put them outside in the spring. And so again, working with nature to the seeds know when to come up and they're already ready to be outside because they're outside. It's super easy. You don't need any specialized equipment. And it's also educational. It's been super fun to see, like, oh, what the heck does that seed look like from a coneflower, from a goldenrod? Oh, what does the seedling look like? Oh, what does it look like as it's growing? What does it look like when it goes to seed? You really get to see every plant in every step of its journey, which is really fun as you get to know native plants even more. So one thing to chat about when we think about seeds and when you think about winter sowing, especially at the time of year where we are now, is making sure you know what the seeds require in terms of how long they need to be cold and moist and sit outside. Um, and so let's talk a little bit about that. So stratification is the term that you'll hear. That is the process of treating seeds to mimic those outdoor conditions that the seeds really need in order to germinate. And so the tip to be aware of here is just to make sure you know how long the seeds that you choose need so that you get the best chances for success. So let's talk about some examples. So stratification codes that you might see, the code itself, so the fact that it says A, C, D here, isn't so critical to memorize. It's the fact that there are different groupings of codes. What you see here are what Prairie Moon Nursery uses, and they're a really reputable nursery that sells seeds out of Minnesota, and they have done a ton of research. They're a great place to go if you don't know what a seed requires, just to do a little bit of research so you understand that. But these ones all listed here would be easy to stratify and to winter sow. So anything that has an A code from Prairie Moon doesn't require any pre-treatment. So you wouldn't even have to winter sow it if you don't want to, but I winter sow all my A's because I can never remember when to get things out. I get very busy with the garden in the spring, and so I put them out in a winter sowing way. But if you were late, that wouldn't matter. Ones with a C and then a number after them, they do germinate after experiencing that period of cold, moist stratification. So you'll see like something like a C30 or a C60, and that number is the number of days that they need to be outside. So an example would be something like an Ohio spiderwort requires, it's a C120. And so that's not one that you would want to start now because it probably doesn't have enough time before it gets warm to actually have gone through that 120 days. And so, as a general rule of thumb, I try to get all my C60s out by, say, the end of January, early February, and then I focus on my C30s. And so, it's a important tip to note at this time of year. And I have some example images here just so that you can see. So a lot of places will put their code on. If you get one from Wild Ones, we put the code on, so it's really easy to reference if you get like a little seed packet from us. And sometimes you just have to look them up. And like I said, that Prairie Moon site is a great place to do it. You might also see some, please.
I have a question about what you just mentioned. Um,
Yes.
you said, could you repeat what you said about if it needs 30 days or 60 days? Like what date? Oh, so you're counting back from the average frost date.
Yeah, roughly. Yes, exactly right.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. Please, if something isn't clear, it's a great, please interrupt. And then the last one that would be fine to sow now, but you might see is a code like a D, which that just means you don't want to cover it with any soil or sand. It needs light to germinate. It's usually they're really tiny. Um, so those would all be really good choices if you're thinking about what seeds to acquire in order to winter sow.
I have a quick
Um,
question.
yeah, go, Jim.
Okay, so never done this before. I'm assuming that most seeds without any intervention are out there the whole winter. So if you had a C30 and you put it out the whole winter, would that be a problem?
No, not at all. You can always do more time. I just
Okay,
wouldn't do any less time.
gotcha. Okay.
Um, because you're exactly right. They would be out there that whole time. And the reason we know like C30 or C60 is because propagators have been experimenting with sort of how little time can they get away with in order to
Right.
to get these to sprout. And so with our method, like more time would never hurt it. It's just don't go less, or you might be a little bit disappointed.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. So some other codes that you might see that I wanted to acknowledge, but I would not recommend to start with, are things that require slightly more rigorous conditions, or slightly more specific conditions, I guess I would say. So you might see something like an E that requires it to be warm and moist, and then cold and moist, and then if all goes well, it sprouts in the spring. Or F, which require cold and moist, and then warm and moist, and then cold and moist again. Um, these pictures are all seeds that I tried because I was very excited about adding things to my shade garden. And I got one of the celandine poppy and nothing else from any of these. So they're absolutely potentially doable in theory, but not the easiest for beginners, is what I would say. So to quote Shelly at the workshop this weekend, don't was her recommendation on these types. But again, if you like to experiment, you certainly could try, but just know that they're a little bit harder because it's harder to keep a container moist and in the right conditions for that long of a period of time. Okay, so let's talk about what you need to winter sow and what it looks like. So here's a list of some of the supplies that you'll want. So containers and potting mix. I will go into a little bit more detail on the following slides, but basically you need something that's clear or translucent to put your soil and your seeds in. And then you need a potting mix that serves as your soil. You'll obviously need seeds. You'll need water because it's easiest usually to pre-moisten your soil as you're putting together your containers. You'll probably want labels unless you enjoy lots of guessing in the spring. You'll want a waterproof garden marker, or I actually really love, they're called China markers or grease pencils. That's this blue thing that you see here. They do not fade, and that's the reason for the waterproof. There's some tricks we'll talk about to get around that if you don't have that. If you don't have one of those, you want some tape, especially if you're using a container that you're going to eventually cut. You might want some sand. I don't always sow with sand. It depends on whether or not I have it. That one I consider quite optional. And then you'll want something to cut with and something to make holes with. So a fairly short list of things to acquire, a number of things you'll probably already have around the house. In terms of containers, you'll see in this presentation and in our workshops, we use milk jugs because they're fairly easy for most people to acquire. You can get the right depth of soil in them, and there's a lot of consistency there. But you see some other examples on this slide. So you see like these other types of clear drink containers. So something like this Tropicana juice, or I think this looks kind of like a water or a juice container to me. You can use the solid type containers is what this guy is, or like a sterilite container is what all of these examples are. You could either put your soil in it in one layer, or some folks put like sort of smaller containers in, and so that way. And then this example, which I'm realizing is a bit too zoomed in, but is a 5-gallon bucket with just like a plastic top on top of it. The key is you want something sturdy that's going to last over the winter, and you want to be able to put holes in the bottom of it to drain and have holes in the top of it so that it can get moisture. But there's a lot of opportunities for creativity if for some reason you don't have access to milk or water jugs, or you just like trying something different. In terms of the potting mix that you'll want to use, you're looking for a sterile base with good water retention that also has good drainage. And so really looking for potting mix on the label when you're out buying something is the best tip I can give. We've given a couple of examples of brands here, but these are by no means the only brands. This Pro Mix, Fox Farm, and Happy Frog. On the forums, people use Miracle-Gro potting mix. I shop at Menards, so they have a sunshine mix right now, but again, it's a potting mix that you're looking for. You will note that Many of them have a peat moss base, which from a sustainability perspective, many of us probably have some hesitation around. You can find some that have more the coconut core or maybe a wood fiber mix. It's just hard to beat the performance of peat moss, quite frankly. And so that is what I continue to use, but I do experiment if I find something else. So if you find something that's not peat based and you have a recommendation, pop that in the chat for us. And then if you're buying a pre-made potting mix, usually it will have something like a vermiculite, perlite to help with drainage and to help retain moisture. And then many of them will also have a bit of nutrition, so either clean compost, leaf mold, worm casting, etc. We recommend avoiding using straight compost, avoiding using like a topsoil or a garden soil. That's just going to be too heavy. It's not going to probably work well, and not to reuse potting soil. So don't use used potting soil. I actually did try this last year because I had a lot of potting soil left over from things that didn't sprout, and I really had poor germination. So it's tempting. It's really tempting, but they might just have had bacteria or fungus or something in them that caused some of my seedlings not to become seedlings. You'll want 4 to 6 inches of soil per container. You might see recommendations that you can go a little bit less, like 3 inches. I find my containers are less likely to dry out if I do get that 4 inches in, so I would recommend to try to aim for that. So you want that level of depth so you can get good root development. And I wouldn't recommend going any less than that. And then, like I said before, you'll want to pre-moisten before you put your seeds in. So let's look at kind of a step-by-step guide for how you might tackle this if you were going to do it in a milk jug. So you'll want to acquire a milk jug and probably clean it out. Otherwise, it's very stinky, I can tell you from experience. You will not need the cap, so you can go ahead and throw the cap away right at the beginning so you don't forget. You want drainage holes in the bottom. I usually do about 5. And if you can see the image, I try to locate them sort of on what would be the corners of the milk jug, 4 of them, so 1 per side, and then I put 1 in the bottom. I sometimes set my jugs out on bare soil, and so that soil, when it's wet and gummy, can block the holes if you put them all in the bottom. So I find it helpful to kind of put them on the edges so that I get good drainage. Then you'll cut the jug in half just under the handle. So that gives you 4 inches of jug to work with to put your soil in. And you'll leave sort of an inch attachment so that you have a hinge so that it can open like this. That helps with taping it back together. You don't have to worry about like which angle and like does it fit. And it also provides like a bit of sturdiness if you need to move them around afterward. Then you'll fill the bottom with that 4 inches of your pre-moistened potting mix. Then you'll add your seeds. I do sort of very gently press the soil down to get rid of air pockets, but don't like Hulk Hogan it and like really press down, just really gently. And then you'll gently press the seeds into the soil so you get really good seed to soil contact. And here, if you're using labels on the inside, you'll label and you'll stick that in the side. Shelly had a great tip for if you don't want to buy labels and you or a friend uses like a white yogurt or a sour cream type container, you can cut those containers into strips and use the clear inside part, the white inside part that doesn't have like the branding on it to make your labels. If you don't have that China pen or a waterproof garden marker, like I mentioned earlier, and you just have like a permanent marker, I would tuck your label into the dirt so that the writing is not exposed to the sun, and then you're more likely to not have it fade. And so when you open the jug, you'll be able to pull the label out and see what you planted. Then you'll close that jug up and you'll tape it all the way around. Some people don't like to use that much tape and might just do a little bit or like drill a hole and do like a twisty tie or something to keep it closed. I find it retains moisture a bit better if I tape all the way around, but again, this method is fun to experiment with different ways to approach it. So you could try either way. And then you'll place the jug outside in a sunny to part sunny spot. Um, and you want it to have exposure to precipitation. So don't put it right next to your house where like the eaves are going to prevent the rain from going inside of it, or like under a table or something. You want it to get that snow and rain and all of that. And again, I will repeat the no cap on it. And then in the spring, you can expect to see sprouts maybe as early as March, but far more likely in the April and May timeframe. Um, they will warm up when the temperature really starts to rise. And so if it's going to be like a freakishly warm day and it's going to be in like the mid to upper 60s, you probably want to open them so that the seedlings don't cook inside, right? Because the sun's going to be beating down on it, and the hot air can only escape so fast through the hole with the cap. You can open them like for good once your danger of frost has passed. Um, and then the transplant, so like putting them out into the garden, or if you want to pot them up into larger pots to grow, can happen usually when they're 2 inches or taller. I like them to feel pretty sturdy by the time I pot them up, so I let them get fairly good sized in the milk jug part of the container before I take them out, like you can see in this image. I'll pause and see, are there any questions on this part? This is like, it's like super easy. It hopefully it feels that way as you're looking at it, but let me just make sure that nothing was unclear.
Yeah, I have a question, Cassie.
Yeah.
I'm sure it depends on the species and the size of the seeds, but about how many seeds would you put in one milk jug?
Oh, this was like one of my biggest questions when I first started. So I've gone like end to end. I've done like dump the whole packet in one and get like a million seedlings. And then I've done like very precise, like let me count out how many, like there's going to be 9 in here. There's going to be 12 in here. And you're right. It really depends on like the species and how close you can get. I like a heavy sprinkle of seeds because I find when I like really try to count them out and only do like 12 or 16, then I have like bad luck with germination. So like a healthy pinch is what I do for everything, quite honestly. But it is like it's hard for the really little ones, like your lobelias, like your cardinal flowers and your great blue lobelia. Like they're so tiny that you almost always have too many of them. Whereas like you can count out like a cup plant or something like that. But yeah, like a pinch is like a healthy pinch is what I typically do.
Okay, thank you. And then once they are, say, a bunch of them germinate, does it become difficult to transplant them if they're all, their roots are all intertwined, or do you just transplant them all together into
Yeah,
another?
that's a great container or question. I do like hunks. So I do like if you let them get like a little bit bigger, then they're healthy and their roots are nice and healthy, then you can do like 4 or 5 in a container. And you don't have to worry about trying to get like this seedling in one container and this in another one. You can kind of, the original winter sowers group calls it the hunk a seedlings method. So you basically can take the whole container, like dump it out, and then like cut it like a loaf of brownies is the analogy that they use, or you can kind of like pull it apart gently with your hands. And not, again, not worry about getting a single seedling, but like plant them in small groupings.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. So if you were to winter sow, I guess I know brownies and it's making everyone hungry. I love it. So if you were to go through this method now and make yourself a couple of winter sowing jugs, a couple of things that you'll want to watch out for. I already mentioned you want to put the containers out in sort of a sunny to part sunny container and not to cover them. This method is really hands off. You will want to check the containers periodically, especially if like, we are not getting a lot of snow or rain for a period of time. And if you see condensation in the container, that's a great sign. You know that there's moisture in there, right? And it's condensing on the surface. If you're not seeing that, the second thing that I usually check is I just like lift it up. So it's kind of the same method that some people use for house plants. If it feels light, it probably does need watered. And the best way to water these is from the bottom. So to get like tub jug or a bowl or a tray and put like an inch or two of water in it and then set the jug in it and let the water come in through the holes on the bottom. You absolutely can water from the top if you need to, but it tends to be a little bit harder to control the stream of water, and you might end up sort of splashing the dirt in the seeds on the side. And so just be very gentle if you water from the top. And then to re-emphasize sort of the tips for later, you'll want to open the jug if it gets quite warm. If it's still like sort of seesawing back and forth and it's going to get cold again, you will want to close them back up. I hate opening and closing jugs, and so I wait as long as I possibly can to open them. I might move them to like a part shady location so they're less likely to get that warm, because I do a lot of jugs and I do not have time for opening and closing jugs. So your choice on how you handle that. And then again, transplant them only after they've grown their true leaves. So the first set of leaves that you'll see will just be their seed leaves, and then they'll start putting on their true leaves after that. But I like to let them get at least 2 inches tall, if not taller, before I try to put them out in the landscape. Seedlings are incredibly tasty to many of the critters that call our gardens home. And so letting them get big enough to hopefully survive, if there's a little bit of nibbling or something tries to dig them up, is my preferred approach. And then different species will germinate at different times. And so you might see that you've got one thing up, but then all of your other jugs still appear to be potting soil. And that's just because that one was ready to go. So at some point, you're going to end up with 95% of them ready and maybe a couple that don't appear to be doing anything. I would wait until June, July, maybe even until the fall to see if you get anything out of those, because sometimes seeds just need a little bit more time. It's actually a positive adaptation on behalf of seeds that they don't all germinate at once, right? Like in case something were to go wrong in nature, no plant wants to put every single one of its seeds in the same basket. So let's talk about a couple of things that might go wrong for you. So sometimes jugs are too wet. This actually tends to be more my problem than too dry. So I might see like algae or moss starting to grow. And in that case, I do just try to open the jug up and let it dry out for a couple of days to get back to kind of the right balance of moisture and dryness. We've already talked about what to do if it's too dry and how you might check for that, right? So if you're not seeing the condensation or if it feels light when you pick it up. If you don't use a waterproof marker or one of those China pens, your labels might fade. For the label on the inside, again, tucking it in the dirt so that the surface of what you've written is not exposed to sunlight is a great way to prevent that. Some folks also write on the outside. So instead of writing on the top, maybe write on the bottom of the jug that's going to be next to the ground. And again, it's not going to be exposed to light and you're more likely to know what that is and not have it fade. And then, Sarah, kind of to your question earlier, you might end up in a situation where you had too many seeds in the jug and you now feel like you have too many plants, and they will be competing with each other. So you can either choose to let them duke it out, and probably they'll be a little bit weaker, or you can again sort of dump them out and like up pot them or get them into the ground sooner to try to take care of that. What might you be in for? I have an example from my own garden. So I started from seed almost all of the plants that you see in this picture, not the liatris in the back, but corms there, but all of this kind of smaller plants in front. So I usually plant things out starting in June because that's when they're big enough that I'm confident that they might actually survive. And then by July, they've actually put on some pretty good growth in that first year. But some things really don't really take off. So there's actually cup plants back here that you can barely see, and they just stayed, that kind of basil rosette the whole year. But by July of the following year, you can see that they've really filled in a lot. You've probably heard that our native plants sleep the first year, they creep, and then they leap the third year. And so you can absolutely get in a remarkable garden by winter sowing things to put in there, and then just being a little bit patient as you wait for them to come. And then my final slide is just some resources that you might want to check out. So if you're looking for seeds or stratification info, here are some good, very reputable resources. So OPN Seed, which is local to us here in Northeast Ohio. And then I mentioned Prairie Moon Nursery and even Prairie Nursery, which is a similar Midwestern nursery in Wisconsin. We on our Wild Ones website actually have sort of a winter sowing written guide if it was something that you wanted to print out and reference. I have it linked here, but you can find it under our resources on our Wild Ones Greater Cleveland page. And then I was thinking of other ideas for places you might want to think about getting seed. Some of these probably won't work this year, but you can be thinking ahead to next year. So Wild Ones Greater Cleveland did our first native seed swap earlier this year. We're thinking of doing one again next year. So you can have that kind of in your mind if you're thinking about doing this for next year. You can collect from your own yard or perhaps a friend or acquaintance's yard where you have permission. It's important to never collect without permission from state, federal, local lands. We want to leave sort of the wild populations where they are, except for people who have asked for permission so that we can track where seeds are coming out of those natural populations. There might be some fall seed collection events at one of your local parks. I know Summit tends to do one every year. And then there are a number of native seed libraries. So there's one at Shaker Nature Center that is open right until they run out of seed. And then I just saw West Creek Conservancy, I think, just announced that they have one too. So, and then of course, if you come to a Wild Ones event, we are usually giving away packets of free seed. So you can get some from us in those cases as well. So I hope you're feeling ready to sow. Again, super easy. Even non-gardeners can figure out how to do it. Yeah, what questions do you have?
I have a question. Thank you for sharing such valuable information. I feel pretty well set to try this out. And I love the jug method, and I do plan on utilizing that. However, I also would like to experiment with putting some directly in the ground to see what does well that way. Do you have experience with that? So I've already purchased my seeds and I have them, and I was planning on getting out there the next thaw that happens. Hopefully, it's enough time whenever things thaw out. I'm hoping I get a chance to put some in the ground.
Yeah, I have not done it. I have not. When I first started, I tried that and I really didn't have a lot of success. And so I haven't done it much since. What I've heard is the best recommendation is just to make sure your ground is really well prepared. So any existing vegetation that isn't the seed that you want is killed so that you're not fighting weeds as well as trying to figure out if your seeds are growing. So I would really look into ground preparation as a key way to make sure that that's going to go well.
Gotcha.
I would also not wait until the ground thaws for some things, because just like we were talking, Cassie was talking about the stratification, like a lot of times, some of those easy to sow ones you kind of throw on that last layer of snow before it starts to melt in the spring. So that way, you know, you get that cold, but then when the snow melts, it provides moisture. I haven't had that much luck with just tossing either. So I think it's definitely worth experimenting.
Even in like a cleared, so the garden, like I have a garden space where I had an herb garden there last year. Certain annuals were planted. So the annuals have died off, and I was going to try the winter stratification method in those areas where the weeds have been somewhat controlled and removed. And I know there's going to be more weeds coming, but I don't know. I'm just like wondering if it's worth trying. Why do you think it didn't work? Like it would work in the milk jugs, but not in the ground.
Who knows?
Well,
I would suggest, just real quick, before you add your knowledge, Cassie. But my only thought is if you do put them directly in the ground, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's just I might have not taken the proper time and care to do it previously. But kind of like the same with the winter sowing, like don't put all your eggs in one basket. So I would make sure if you did purchase seeds, my advice would just be not to sow them all, so that way in case some don't germinate, you still have some seeds for next year to try. But who knows why? I my soil here isn't great at my house also, so that's why I usually tend to I haven't had great success with seed sowing. Of course, my Liatris is now taking over my one bed from itself, self-sowing. So maybe it was just user error on my part, but
well,
I
thank
think,
you.
I mean,
Thank you for your
we talked
insight.
earlier. We talked earlier about how critters like to eat seeds. I feel like I provided a buffet actually, because I like many of us are trying to plant native seeds and plants in order to support wildlife, which then like enjoys maybe the seeds, if you will. And then if you recall, we've had a couple of like really significant rain events in the spring, the past couple of years. And so seeds are small, they're easy to wash away. And so Janice, I love your suggestion of sort of not putting all your eggs in one basket. Like try it. Like maybe it'll work great for you. But if it doesn't, maybe you'll have some in jugs to put in that space if it doesn't work well.
Yes, I do remember the flood that happened. Like, kind of the area I'm planting in did have a pretty big flood. So, I only asked because I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to acquire enough milk jugs. But I just sent out a message on social media. So, is that how you guys do it? Is just like asking on social media, asking friends to save theirs?
Friends, family, my family knows I'm a weirdo, and I just get milk jugs from them every time I see them now.
Or,
It's
or just
lovely.
ask us, because I'm pretty sure I have at least 15 in my garage by itself. So
I've
yeah,
also heard that
we're a big crowd where we know we want and need milk jugs for a lot of our stuff. Also, a really great tip I found in working because we're a nonprofit, if you ask Starbucks or a place like that that goes through a lot of those types of jugs,
Whoa.
and they know that you want it for a workshop or something like that, they will save it for you.
yeah,
Wow. Cool.
that's what I was gonna say. Or even better, your local coffee shop if you want to help support them. But who knows if their containers, are a little bit clear. So just going in and having that conversation. But yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna suggest.
I can just attest a real quick thing about Starbucks. Years ago, when I was amending my soil, they were very good at giving me coffee grounds. Like I got these big buckets of coffee grounds with no problem, as long as they're in the trash. They're getting rid of them, so they'll probably give you jugs of their old milk or whatever they use, cream and stuff. Yeah.
Heard that as well. Does anybody else have any questions? See anything. Thank you so much, Cassie. That was so good.
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie.
Yeah.
That was amazing. I've already been to one of these this winter, and that was even more information in addition to what was presented at the last talk that I attended. So
I love it.
you.
Well, let me social
That's
media
awesome.
hat for just one moment. Take some pictures of your jugs and then take some pictures when they start to sprout. Share them with us so that I can put them on social media and we can show other people how easy and exciting this is.
Yes. Let's do it. Let's spread the word.
Love it.
Yes.